This morning, the state is now addressing questions about fairness and systemic bias in child welfare services in northeastern Colorado.
Since March, we've been following this story about the mishandling of these cases in Washington County. Courtney Yoon and photojournalist Anna Houston are sharing the latest report regarding dozens of complaints.
We operated for so long under the assumption that if we just did as we were told, everything would be fine.
Alicia Johansson and Fred Thornton spent years fighting for their son Carter.
Trust the system. This is what they're here for.
But what happens when the system takes too long?
You only have to look at a child that you know, to see how much they change, how much they grow, how much they develop in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And then imagine that your child isn't in your care for 3.5 years.
Stephanie Villafuerte, Colorado's child protection ombudsman, thinks the state's child welfare system should do better.
We are required by law to give families the tools and the resources they need so that they can reunite with their children in a safe way. When we fail to give them those services, or we delay in giving them those services, we delay child-parent reunification, which means that you will have children languishing in foster care for months, if not years.
In this letter, the ombudsman alerted the Colorado Department of Human Services back in June, alleging systemic bias. They cited 64 violations in child welfare practices in Washington County, based on complaints received about Carter's parents and 5 other families.
There needs to be a sense of urgency around these issues.
It took 6 months for the state to respond, agreeing with roughly 70% of the allegations of mistreatment. CDHS said, quote, "The totality of information provided for the complaints does not support claims of alleged bias." But the ombudsman disagrees.
Parents were not being treated respectfully, they were not being treated professionally, and in many instances they weren't being given the services they needed to reunite with their children.
What's still concerning to the ombudsman is the way the state conducted this internal investigation.
They did not interview a single parent, family member, community stakeholder, or even a youth in this instance. I don't see how one can evaluate whether there is systemic bias without interviewing the very people who have been impacted.
She worries there'll be no accountability.
The way that our laws are set up is that the Colorado Department of Human Services is the supervising entity for all county human service departments. They are the last stop.
Slowly, you gotta look left.
Which leaves parents like Alicia and Fred still wondering why the system failed them.
There's supposed to be oversight. They're supposed to make sure that these things don't happen, and that just wasn't there here.
CDHS reviewed all 64 allegations and decided they didn't need to look into any other cases. The department gave us a statement saying over the last 6 months, it investigated the claims, provided training, conducted multiple site visits, and, quote, did not identify any pervasive practice issues.
Now, in the middle of all of this, you got the adorable child Carter. There's always a kid in the center of this. You think about the trauma that something like this has on them. Are they talking about trying to find any help for these kids too?
Right, yeah. Well, now that he's with his family, like that's a win, that he was reunified, that happened. That the concern with the ombudsman's office was that some of these families maybe were treated with bias, the parents were treated with bias, and that prolonged the amount of time that the child, their biological son, was separated from them. In this case, it was 3.5 years that Carter was separated from his parents, but they're together now and seem to be doing really well.
It's a good story, Courtney. Thank you so much.